Joining us now at the Petroleum Safety Conference in Banff is Holly Elke, and you're with SH&E Systems Solutions.
Yes.
Tell us what you do.
Wow, that's a big order.
We've got a good 4 minutes.
Excellent. Our primary basis is, of course, we're a consulting company, so we do a tremendous amount of work working with clients in oil and gas, forestry, manufacturing, and overseas, U.S., health and safety audits, training. My background is quality management, so we do a lot of integrated quality, environment, health and safety, systems, programs, and risk assessment.
Okay. Well, and risk assessment is what you were talking about today, just a short time ago. And risk assessment is quite a subjective topic, isn't it?
It can be, and so this is where a lot of debate has started over the last 10 years, where, as I said in my presentation, we have professionals who will debate this for an hour over the simple terminology of hazard versus risk. So we've had some movement, of course, in the international world where ISO has stepped in and said, let's create a standard and give people guidelines so that they can make more numerical, logical, process-based, and quantitative-based decisions.
Do you see... when you look at the industry, and you've been doing this, you've had your own company for what, about 6 years now? Was it 2007 is when you started this one?
Yeah, I've been on my own for about 7 years. I've been in the industry for about 23 years.
Okay. So how have you seen things change when it comes to risk assessment and safety out in the oil fields?
Wow. It has changed dramatically. As I said in my presentation, of course, that in the early 80s, late 70s, a risk assessment was almost non-existent. We understood how to do work and we knew what was hazardous, but to actually systematically sit down and say, can we perceive or foresee hazards, was not always commonplace. And unfortunately, if people got hurt or they got killed, it almost became part of the way we did business, and that was not acceptable. So when a lot of that changed with our core program and changes in Alberta, by the year 2000 and now today, present day, we've gone the other way where zero is almost becoming mandatory, and being able to defend why you fix certain things or why you miss certain things. How do you do that? So the oil and gas industry has really progressed in embracing a lot of these standards to say we need to sit down and be defendable and show the public, our people, and lastly our regulators that yes, we are logical in how we are determining the things we do.
Well, you talk about standards. If you're using safety equipment on a rig, say, is it something that should be, there should be a standard set, they must meet a certain qualification, or is safety equipment because it's got that title?
That's a double-edged sword, because of course what happens is that we are seeing that move now where we went from having very little, our blue book was this thick back in the 80s, to having regulations that are this thick, not to mention all the standards that go with it. Standards are good, but the problem is if they are prescriptive, if they are for every little single point, and then we see that even in ISO, you could spend your lifetime reading them and never be able to follow them. So the key is to find standards that will give us a broader base approach so that it gives us some logic, puts some control back in the company of the employees and of the company, instead of giving away our power and saying, well, you have to think for me. So standards, if they are broad-based, if they, for instance, like the ones we are using, here is a framework in which you can set risk goals, determine a risk criteria as a company, and determine your risks and your hazards that make sense to you, not be dictated to by a particular standard or a regulation because you might see it once in 100 years of working.
Right. Now, I'm thinking of some sort of safety products. Katch makes a mat that goes and covers the rig floor so that people don't slip and that sort of thing. Now, they've had it meet certain safety standards. Is that an important criteria for getting something into the workplace, that it meet a certain criteria to get there?
I agree, and coming from a quality background, that is probably the one exception, is that when we're dealing with products and products that need to be used within a workplace, having a minimum level of certification, which of course we see very commonly within ANSI and CSA, and certainly ISO does a lot of those for Europe, being able to say we've met that standard. Quality management was our biggest problem. Nothing like getting a product and it fails and then it kills somebody. So having that minimum standard is very important.
It's interesting because you look at something like, I was talking with somebody at the conference here earlier today, we were talking about something as simple as a hockey helmet that has to be approved before it can be put on the shelves. Is that the way the industry should be, the oil industry, or do you feel it is there, or is this something that it should be striving for as opposed to just taking something and saying, this is a good product here, why don't you try this, it'll save lives?
I think one of the other things we're seeing again is with the product standards. At one time, they would have been very broad-based and said all products that fall into this grouping, here is the way the manufacturer should approach it. As opposed to now with lawsuits and people being fearful, we are starting to almost get a bit of an overkill in the industry where every single deviation of every product now has to have all these detailed standards. We see this quite often in the U.S. But the problem is that how do you keep up as a manufacturer? I've worked for original equipment manufacturers, and you pull your hair out trying to determine which standard are you supposed to meet, because between countries they don't even match. So one of the dangers with product standards is, again, they need to be not so much prescriptive, but broad-based enough to include a whole group classification and allow enough guidance so that the manufacturer can fill in the details and defend it.
Do you find that, I guess, is that a growing industry when it comes to the oil sector? Is safety products and things to ensure that workers' lives are I guess, don't get into any trouble or hazard?
It is very much a growing industry, as is all of the safety industry, which makes me laugh because, of course, 20 years ago, my father said to me, "You mean somebody's going to pay you to do safety?"
And you said eventually.
I said, "I hope so eventually," but that's the reality. Is that certainly from product point of view, always growing more and more, because we have people are socially aware, they are socially responsible. Public pressure puts a lot onto the manufacturers and the industry to be at the highest level. The danger is that it's about perception as well, because you could use the same product in a different industry who doesn't have quite such a high profile, and would the same level of standard or expectation apply? That's one of the debates.
Mm-hmm. You say your dad said, would anybody pay for this? Is it difficult to get oil companies to think in this direction, or is that getting easier?
It's definitely much easier. 20 years ago, they kind of said, yeah, I guess if we have to, you're an evil necessity. But nowadays, we get calls, and people want to be proactive. They're looking to improve businesses to be efficient and effective. And we sell on that, because really, if you are efficient and effective and making a profit, you are probably doing a good job of looking after your people and your company assets.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
All right, we've been chatting with Holly Elke right here on Can I Media.